It was a perfect Saturday, the kind of day that makes you wonder why you ever left the comfort of your couch to live in the real world. The sun was shining, the waves were lazily crashing against the shore, and all I had planned was to lounge in my beach chair with a cold drink in hand, maybe read a few chapters of the book I'd been working on for weeks. I had the entire beach to myself. Well, almost. I lived in a small, quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, right by the water. It wasn't one of those fancy gated communities with strict rules and nosy neighbors. It was laid back. People minded their own business, came and went, and nobody gave a damn about what you did as long as you didn't break anything, or, God forbid, throw a loud party on a Tuesday. And then came Karen. Karen was the kind of person who couldn't stand the idea of peace. She was the HOA president, which, if you ask me, is like giving a toddler the keys to a car. Things are gonna get weird and fast. It all started when I was sitting there, sipping on my iced tea, enjoying my me time. I had the ocean breeze in my face, a perfect view of the horizon, and my phone on silent. It was the ideal moment, right up until I saw her. She came marching down the beach, her chunky, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, her mouth moving as if she was talking to herself. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she lived down the street, and we had a sort of understanding. I did my thing, she did hers, and we pretended to tolerate each other. So when she got close and started waving at me, I didn't think anything of it. "Alex," she shouted, practically skipping in her flip-flops. "Hi, we need to talk." I raised an eyebrow, putting my book down. Great. What could she possibly need to talk to me about? The last time I had heard from her was when she emailed everyone in the neighborhood about a mandatory lawn watering schedule. "Hey, Karen, what's up?" I said, keeping it casual but already bracing for impact. "Everything, Alex, everything," she said with that grin. The kind of grin that should have come with a warning sign. She didn't even let me respond before she blurted out, "We're throwing a big beach party today. The HOA's officially taking over the beach for a community event. And guess what? You're hosting." "Wait, what?" I blinked. I stared at her, half convinced I'd heard her wrong. "Excuse me, I'm hosting," I asked, already feeling the burn of frustration rising. Karen, I don't think I agreed to host anything." "Oh, don't worry about it," she chirped, as if she were doing me a huge favor. "It's a community event. It's for the whole neighborhood, you know, a big get-together. We'll be having games, music, food, dancing, you know, all the fun stuff. It'll be great." I just stared at her slack-jawed. "Karen, this is my property, my land. I don't remember signing up for your beach party." She waved her hand like she was dismissing a pesky fly. "Details, details. We all know this beach is part of the community space. We're all sharing it, right? Think of it as a neighborhood bonding thing. It'll be good for everyone. I'll make sure to tell everyone to keep it low-key. Just a small get-together, nothing too crazy." "Small get-together," I muttered under my breath. "Are you sure?" She smiled wider now, the sort of smile that makes you feel like you've already lost the battle. "I'll just let everyone know. See you soon." And before I could even reply, she turned on her heel and marched away, her flip-flops slapping against the sand as she headed down the beach, likely to annoy someone else. I stared at the spot where she had just been, my iced tea long forgotten in my hand. Did she just invite an entire HOA gathering onto my land without asking? Did she seriously think she could just commandeer my beach like that? I sighed and sank into my beach chair, trying to calm myself down. There had to be a mistake, right? Maybe she didn't mean to invite everyone. Maybe she just meant a couple of neighbors. But the more I thought about it, the more my stomach churned. Karen wasn't exactly known for her ability to understand personal boundaries. She was the type who would show up at your door at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning to talk about how your mailbox was a shade of brown that did fit the neighborhood's vibe. So I braced myself. I knew this wasn't going to end well. An hour later, the first wave of partygoers began to arrive. Of course, it started innocently enough. Just a couple of families trickling in, carrying coolers, beach chairs, and frisbees. I figured, okay, maybe this isn't going to be too bad. But then the trucks rolled in. First came the food trucks, two of them parked right in front of my property. One was serving tacos, so at least that was something good. And the other was some sort of seafood platter that I was pretty sure was going to end up all over my front yard. Then came the bounce houses. Multiple bounce houses. One of them looked like a giant, inflatable pirate ship, and I couldn't even begin to imagine how that was going to fit into the beach theme Karen claimed to be going for. And then the music. Oh God, the music. At first it was just some light beach tunes. But within minutes, someone cranked it up to 11 and I was hearing the latest pop hits blasting at full volume. Was this really happening? Were they seriously throwing a rager on my front lawn? I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I just stood there, frozen, watching the madness unfold. Karen, of course, was right in the center of it all, directing traffic like she was hosting some kind of beachside war zone. She had a whistle around her neck, a clipboard in her hand, and a megaphone. Because why not add a megaphone to the mix? "You're doing great, everyone," she yelled into it, her voice echoing across the beach. "Let's keep it fun. And remember, this is for the community. We're all here to bond and build relationships, so let's get those lawn chairs in a circle." As she spoke, I noticed something strange. Karen's husband, Jeff, was nowhere to be seen. And then, as if on cue, a second mariachi band appeared out of nowhere, walking across the sand with their trumpets blaring. I stood there in complete shock, watching as my quiet, peaceful beach was slowly taken over by chaos. It was like a bad dream, except I couldn't wake up. I tried to approach Karen, but she was too busy directing the flow of the party. One of the neighbors, a guy named Rick, looked at me with a grin and raised a beer can. "Hey, Alex, you joining us?" he called out. I opened my mouth to explain. No, this was not okay. But before I could say anything, the mariachi band launched into a full-blown song, drowning out my words. The sound was deafening. The next thing I knew, someone was tossing a beach ball in my direction, and I had no choice but to swat it away, dodging a group of kids who were running toward me, their faces painted like little sea creatures. And just like that, my perfect Saturday slipped away, never to return. I stood there, hands on my hips, watching as the madness unfolded. This was not a neighborhood gathering. This was a full-blown beach party, on my beach with my sand, my ocean, my peace. And the worst part? I had a feeling it was only going to get worse. Stay tuned, Karen. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. By the time the sun was high in the sky, my quiet beach had officially transformed into Pandemonium Central. I had tried everything I could think of to make Karen and her little partygoers leave. I even politely asked one of the guests, who I swear was about to set up a volleyball net on my lawn, if they could kindly relocate to a public beach. But they just stared at me like I was speaking a different language. So much for polite. I had no idea what I was dealing with when Karen told me, "Small community event." This was no small event. This was a full-blown, out-of-control hurricane of bad decisions. First, the taco truck people decided they'd park their vehicle right on my driveway, blocking me in completely. At this point, I was so frustrated I wanted to walk up to the truck, knock on the window, and scream, "Excuse me, I didn't invite you here. You're parked on private property." But instead, I just took a deep breath and walked back to my deck, muttering to myself. Karen's voice blasted through the megaphone again, shaking me out of my thoughts. "All right, everyone, time for the piñata challenge. Let's see who can break it the quickest." I looked out the window, horrified. The piñata wasn't even shaped like a cute animal or something innocent. It was a giant inflatable seashell. Whoever came up with this idea had no taste whatsoever. And of course, a crowd of people gathered around, each of them drunkenly swinging at the poor seashell like they were auditioning for an Olympic event. "Yeah, smash it," one of the partygoers yelled, high-fiving another person after landing a solid hit. I couldn't tell if they were aiming for the piñata or just swinging for the fun of it, but at this point, I didn't care. I watched in disbelief as a kid on a scooter zoomed by, nearly taking out an inflatable palm tree. Then came the music. Oh, the music. Whoever thought it was a good idea to mix loud party anthems with beach sounds should be banned from making decisions ever again. At first, it was just your typical beach tunes, but as the party grew, the volume grew with it. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, they switched to a playlist of early 2000s pop hits. It felt like I had accidentally entered a time warp, one where everyone was wearing too much neon and singing along to Britney Spears. I had no idea what to do. I looked around the deck, searching for a solution. Do I call the police? Do I scream? Do I knock some sense into Karen? I was still stewing when my neighbor, Bob, walked by carrying a cooler filled with what I assumed was alcohol. Bob was the quiet type, the kind of guy who didn't say much but would show up to mow his lawn in the most tactical manner, like he was preparing for a covert mission. He gave me a nod as he passed, but it wasn't exactly comforting. "You see this madness?" I asked him, gesturing at the carnival in front of my house. Bob nodded, a slight grimace on his face. "Yeah, wild, huh?" "Wild, Bob, this is a disaster. They've taken over my entire beach." Bob took a long pause before responding. Well, it's just how things go when Karen gets involved. She doesn't really know the meaning of personal space, if you catch my drift. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Bob was the king of understatement. She has no clue, I muttered, but even as I said it, the party didn't stop. In fact, it was only picking up speed. The piñata was finally destroyed, partly due to the force of a fully grown man who had clearly had too many margaritas. Now people were walking around with candy stuck in their hair, and one woman was wearing a seashell crown she had fashioned out of broken pieces of the inflatable. It looked like something from a bad reality show. And then, just when I thought I'd seen the worst of it, a new player entered the scene. A mariachi band. I swear to you, I don't know how they found out about this disaster of a party, but somehow they appeared out of nowhere. 3 musicians in full mariachi garb, complete with big hats, strumming guitars and loudly serenading the entire neighborhood. I watched, slack-jawed, as one of them tried to balance a tequila bottle on top of his head while twirling a tambourine. The noise was deafening. Karen, of course, was in her element. She spotted the band and waved her arms like a captain directing an incoming ship. "Everyone," she screamed, her voice amplified by the megaphone. "Time for the cha-cha slide. Get on your feet." The crowd cheered. No one knew what was happening anymore, least of all me. The beach was a mix of inflatable pools, half-eaten tacos, broken piñatas, and a mariachi band serenading people who were more interested in dancing the Macarena than appreciating the fine art of traditional Mexican music. I was trying to process everything, my beach, my property, my entire sense of peace, all in utter chaos, when something even stranger happened. A guy I didn't recognize appeared, walking toward me with a giant inflatable bull in tow. "Hey, Alex," he shouted, waving a hand. "You hosting the bull ride?" I blinked, confused. "What bull ride, Before I could finish my sentence, the guy threw the bull onto the sand and began inflating it. "It's gonna be a wild one, a mechanical bull at the beach, right? Perfect for the party." I stood there frozen. Was this real life? Was this actually happening? "I don't think this is," I started, but the guy was already strapping on the controls, and before I could stop him, Karen was on the bull, riding it like she was in some kind of country fair competition. The crowd was going wild, laughing and shouting, cheering her on as she bounced up and down. I watched, horrified and completely out of my element. This was no longer a beach party. This was a nightmare, and I was in the middle of it. I tried one more time to approach Karen, my blood boiling. "Karen!" I shouted, finally making my way through the crowd of people. "What the heck is this? You've completely taken over my beach." She didn't even look at me. Still on the bull, her hair flying everywhere, she waved me off. "It's a community event, Alex. Everyone's having fun. Relax, will you?" Relax? I was about to lose it. I had no idea how to stop this madness. My beach had become the set for the world's worst reality show, and I was the unwilling star. The sun was blazing down, the music was getting louder, and Karen was still trying to take control of everything. At that moment, I realized there was no way I was going to let her get away with this. No way in hell. This had gone too far, and it was time to take action. But how? How do you fight back against a woman who treats her HOA position like a dictatorship? That's when the idea hit me. It wasn't enough to ask them to leave, or even to call the cops. I needed something bigger. Something that would make Karen understand that messing with me, my land, and my life would come with consequences. And I was really starting to get creative about what those consequences might look like. But for now, I just stood there, my hands clenched into fists, watching as Karen, still on the mechanical bull, yelled into the air, "This is the best day ever." It might have been the best day for her, but for me, this was only the beginning. As if the bull riding, taco eating, mariachi playing, bounce house having chaos wasn't enough to make my head spin, I was still standing there in the middle of it all, trying to figure out how in the world I had ended up as the unwilling host of a beach party that was quickly spiraling into madness. I'd been packing around, muttering to myself like some character in a bad sitcom, when I stumbled upon something that completely shifted the game. It happened when I went to take a quick breather inside. I was trying to escape the noise and the crowd for a few minutes, just to gather my thoughts and remind myself that I wasn't dreaming. I went inside my house, grabbed another iced tea, because apparently my body had become 90% caffeine and ice water by this point, and sat down on the couch. My mind raced, thinking about how I could get these people to leave. But the more I thought, the more I realized I wasn't just dealing with rude neighbors and an overzealous HOA president. I was dealing with something much worse. As I stared out the window, watching people laughing and dancing like they were at some sort of warped circus, I noticed something strange. The door to my home office was slightly ajar, which was odd because I was pretty sure I had closed it when I came outside. I didn't think much of it at first, but the more I stared at it, the more it bugged me. Why would I leave it open? I stood up from the couch, feeling that uneasy knot in my stomach tighten. I walked over to the door, half expecting to find something completely unremarkable. Maybe I'd left a notebook on the desk or forgotten to shut off my computer. But when I stepped inside, I found something that made my blood run cold. The drawer to my filing cabinet was open. I never left it open. I had a strict system for keeping my personal documents in order. But there it was, wide open, with files scattered about like someone had been rifling through them. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the room, my eyes darting over the papers that were clearly out of place. They weren't the usual boring bills or forms I had stashed away. No, these were something else entirely. These were financial records. My first instinct was to close the drawer and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was sifting through the papers. And what I found made my jaw drop. There it was, Karen's name on a document that didn't belong to her. The heading at the top was something that made me feel sick just reading it. HOA account withdrawals, personal use. I blinked and reread it just to make sure I wasn't seeing things. It was an invoice, but the numbers weren't for any of the HOA's typical expenses. No, this was a bill for something entirely different. A luxury spa retreat in the Bahamas. A vacation I knew damn well wasn't a community event. I pulled out more papers, one after another, each with more damning information about Karen's secret spending. Hotel bills, private jet rentals, expensive dinners. These weren't just miscellaneous HOA expenses, as she liked to call them. They were personal luxury items she'd been funneling through HOA funds, money that was supposed to go toward the community. I took a deep breath, trying to control my racing thoughts. My brain scrambled to process everything. This was beyond annoying beach parties and obnoxious mariachi bands. This was fraud, criminal activity. I was sitting on a goldmine of evidence that could bring her down. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to call the cops right then and there, but something stopped me. If I went to the authorities, they'd need more than just a few papers. I'd have to have concrete evidence. Proof that Karen wasn't just skimming a little extra for a beach house or a weekend trip. No, this went deeper than that. It wasn't just about her having a fun time on my property anymore. It was about corruption, greed, taking advantage of the very people she was supposed to be serving. And then I had a thought, a terrible, wonderful thought. If I played this right, I could use Karen's own schemes to get back at her. I could outsmart her. It felt wrong, but also so sweet. And if I was going to survive the mess she had made of my life, I needed to get creative. But for now, I needed more information. I couldn't just walk into the HOA office and announce that Karen was a criminal. I needed to be smarter. I needed to play it cool, let her dig herself in deeper, and then, when the time was right, hit her with a bombshell she'd never see coming. I carefully put the papers back in the drawer and closed it, making sure everything looked like it had before. I didn't want anyone getting suspicious. Then, with the evidence safely tucked away, I made my way back outside to face the disaster zone. The moment I stepped out onto the porch, the scene was even worse than before. The mechanical bull was still spinning around wildly, with Karen, of course, riding it like she had just won a gold medal. The crowd had grown bigger, and the beach was covered in a kaleidoscope of colored beach towels, empty beer cans, and half-eaten tacos. The mariachi band was still going strong, and I swear I saw someone wearing a flotation device as a fashion statement. I almost wanted to turn around and retreat inside again, but I knew I had to stay in control. I couldn't let Karen think she was getting the best of me. Not now, not ever. I walked back toward the group, trying to come up with a plan in my head. That's when I spotted Rick again, the quiet neighbor I had talked to earlier. He was standing by the taco truck, looking more uncomfortable than usual, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. I wandered over to him. "Hey, Rick," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though my frustration was bubbling under the surface. "You still here?" Rick looked over at me and gave a quick, uneasy nod. "Yeah, not much else to do, huh? I was hoping it would be just a little gathering, but..." He trailed off, his face a picture of silent judgment as he scanned the mess that surrounded us. "You see what's going on here?" I asked him, lowering my voice. "This isn't a party, this is a disaster." "I know," Rick muttered. "You're not the only one thinking that, but it's Karen's show and you know how that goes." He hesitated before adding, "But you might want to know something." My eyes narrowed. "What?" Rick glanced around, then lowered his voice even further. "Karen's not just a nightmare when it comes to parties. Word on the street is she's been doing some shady stuff with the HOA funds for a while. People have been talking about it. People who know things." My heart skipped a beat. "Shady stuff?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Rick nodded. "Yeah, but no one wants to rock the boat. If you've been around long enough, you know how much power she holds in this neighborhood. People are scared to speak up." I clenched my fists. Scared? Of Karen? It made sense now. She had been pulling the strings, using her position to run things however she wanted, hiding behind the facade of community spirit to cover up her greed. And now I had proof. I looked at Rick, a plan forming in my mind. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, my voice cold with resolve. "But I think it's time someone rocked the boat." Rick gave me a knowing look. "Just be careful, Alex. She's not someone you want to mess with." I smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Don't worry, I've got this." And just like that, I knew what I had to do. I was going to expose Karen for the fraud she was. It wasn't just about my beach anymore. It was about everyone who'd been taken advantage of. I had the evidence, and now I had a plan. Karen might think she had won, but she hadn't seen anything yet. It's amazing how quickly things can shift when you're truly fed up. A few hours ago, I was just a guy trying to enjoy his beach house. Now, I was the guy plotting to bring down the worst HOA president this neighborhood had ever seen. I'd been pushed too far, and Karen's beach party, the one that had taken over my life, was the last straw. I spent the rest of that chaotic afternoon packing back and forth in my living room, plotting my next move. As I stared out the window at the absolute circus unfolding on my beach, I felt a surge of adrenaline. It wasn't enough to just ask them to leave. No, I was going to use Karen's own schemes against her. If she wanted a war, I was about to give her one. My first task: gather all the evidence I could. The financial records I had found were just the beginning. I knew I needed more, something that would tie her directly to the community's funds. So I spent the next few hours digging through files, making mental notes, and trying to make sense of the disarray Karen had left behind. I had everything I needed to make her life a living nightmare. The question now was, how was I going to do this without making it look like I was the one pushing back? I wasn't stupid. If I went in guns blazing, Karen would find some way to twist the narrative. I needed to be sneaky. I started by quietly reaching out to some of the quieter neighbors who were just as fed up with Karen's antics as I was, but didn't have the guts to speak up. There was Bob, my reclusive neighbor, who was always ready to gossip but never made a move when it came to confrontation. Then there was Linda from down the street, sweet woman, always nice, but scared of stepping on anyone's toes. The thing was, I wasn't scared. And neither would they be, once I showed them what Karen had been doing behind their backs. I got Bob on the phone first. He was skeptical at first, but after a quick explanation about the money Karen had been embezzling, he was on board. "You know, I've heard rumors for months about her using HOA funds for personal stuff," he said, lowering his voice like he was about to tell me a secret. "I just didn't know how deep it went. But this is something else, Alex." "I know," I replied, my mind spinning with plans. "But here's the thing, Karen's too comfortable. She thinks she can run this place like a dictatorship. I'm going to take her down, but I need your help." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "All right, what do you need me to do?" I smiled. "Just keep an eye out for any more documents that might pop up. If you find anything that connects her to more shady expenses, let me know." Next up, I called Linda. I could practically hear her sigh of relief when she picked up. "Alex, I've been meaning to talk to you about this party," she started. "It's getting out of hand, isn't it? I thought I was going to lose my mind with the music blaring like that." "I hear you, Linda," I said, cutting her off before she could spiral into a rant. "Listen, this isn't just about the party anymore. I need your help with something bigger." She went quiet for a moment, but then said, "Bigger? What do you mean?" "I'm going after Karen," I said, keeping my voice low. "I've got proof she's been stealing from the HOA funds. She's been using the money for personal expenses, vacations, luxury services, you name it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh my God," Linda whispered. "That woman's a thief." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "But here's the thing. If we want to make sure she's gone for good, we need to expose her in a way she can't talk her way out of. I'm going to use her own game against her." Linda was quiet for a second, then said, "I'm in. What do you need me to do?" "Keep your eyes peeled. Look for any of Karen's personal documents or anything else that looks like it could be a part of the scam. If you find something, get it to me. And do it quietly." She agreed, and just like that, I had a small team working in the shadows. The next part of my plan was the trickiest. I needed to make sure I could gather all the evidence I could without drawing attention to myself. So I started hanging around the HOA meetings a little more than usual. Karen never missed a chance to parade around in her self-appointed role as the queen of the neighborhood, and I knew she'd be talking about her next big event, one that was sure to make her even more obvious. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I decided it was time to attend. I didn't usually go to these things. In fact, I made it a point to avoid them. But I had a feeling that with all the pressure mounting, Karen would be distracted and easy to manipulate. As I walked into the community center that evening, I could feel my palms sweat. The room was filled with the usual mix of HOA members, people who would nod politely, pretend to be interested, and then go back to their own lives once the meeting was over. It was all the same old, same old. Except tonight, I wasn't just another face in the crowd. I was a man on a mission. I found an empty seat near the back, but Karen's voice rang through the room before I could even sit down. "All right, everyone, we've got a lot to cover tonight," she announced in her usual high-pitched voice. "First things first, our upcoming community event." I bit back a groan. Of course, she'd be starting with that. "Another event?" I muttered under my breath. But I wasn't there to complain. I was there to get what I needed. Karen went on and on about how the next event would be even bigger and better than last year. She waved her hands around, practically floating on a cloud of self-importance. I knew this was the moment she would slip up. And slip up she did. Halfway through the meeting, Karen casually mentioned something about the budget for the upcoming party. "Now about the budget for the event," she said, tapping a pen on the table like she was trying to think. "I've already allocated some funds for, well, let's just say special entertainment." I froze. Special entertainment. That didn't sound like something the HOA should be spending money on. As she droned on, I quickly grabbed my phone, sending Bob and Linda a message about what I had overheard. I wasn't sure what she meant by special entertainment, but I knew it couldn't be good. I wasn't going to let it slide. The meeting continued, but I was done listening. My mind was racing, plotting out the next move. I had all the pieces in place, and now I needed to make sure Karen didn't realize she was the one being set up. By the time the meeting ended, I had everything I needed. Bob had found a few more questionable expenses in the HOA accounts, and Linda had come through with a set of receipts that proved Karen had been using HOA funds for personal trips. I was ready, but I wasn't going to rush this. No, I needed to hit Karen where it hurt the most, her reputation. I was going to make sure she lost everything. The plan was simple. I would leak the documents anonymously to the other HOA members, ensuring that Karen's lies were exposed in front of everyone. The other neighbors had a right to know how they'd been duped. But that was just the beginning. Once Karen's reputation was ruined, I was going to make sure the consequences didn't stop there, because no one messes with my beach and gets away with it. I had spent the last few days piecing together everything I needed to bring Karen down, but that night, the moment of truth had arrived. It was time for her to face the consequences of her actions, and it was going to be spectacular. I had already sent out the evidence, an anonymous tip with all the juicy details about Karen's embezzlement. From the expensive vacations she'd taken on HOA funds to the spa retreats that never had anything to do with community events. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth started to spread like wildfire. The phone call that came late the next morning confirmed my suspicions. It was from Bob. "Alex, you're not gonna believe this," he said, his voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "The HOA's having an emergency meeting today, and guess who's in the hot seat?" I didn't even need to ask. Karen. "Yep, the documents you sent out went viral. People are livid, Alex. They've been calling her out all morning, and now she's scrambling to make excuses." I could almost hear the grin on Bob's face. It felt so good knowing that Karen, the queen of the neighborhood, was getting what was coming to her. "I'm heading over," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. "I want to be there when she gets what's coming to her." When I arrived at the community center, I could already feel the tension in the air. It wasn't like the usual HOA meetings, where everyone politely pretended to care about the lawn mowing schedule or the color of the mailboxes. Today, the place felt like a powder keg, and Karen was the spark. I slipped into the back of the room, taking a seat just as the meeting was about to begin. Karen was sitting at the front, looking more flustered than I'd ever seen her. She had her hands clasped tightly in front of her, and her lips were pinched into a thin line. The room was filled with the usual crowd, but today everyone had the same look on their face: disappointment, anger, and the unmistakable scent of betrayal. I could barely contain my grin as I leaned back in my chair. I had waited for this moment for far too long. The meeting started, and Karen tried to maintain her usual "I'm in control" posture, but it wasn't working. The moment the first neighbor stood up to speak, I could see the cracks in her facade. "Karen," Mr. Wilson, one of the older residents, began, his voice trembling with fury. "What is this? We trusted you, we voted for you, and you've been stealing from us, from our community." Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. I could see the sweat beading on her forehead. She opened her mouth to say something, but Mr. Wilson wasn't finished. "Do you have any idea how much you've hurt this neighborhood?" he continued. "We pay those dues so our streets stay clean, our community stays safe, and so you could make sure we didn't get ripped off. And now you've been spending that money on yourself. This isn't a mistake, Karen. This is a crime." The room was silent. Everyone was staring at her, waiting for an answer. But Karen, she had nothing. She stammered for a second, trying to find the right words, but it was clear she had been caught red-handed. "Mr. Wilson, I didn't mean for it to happen this way," Karen said, her voice shaky. "It wasn't supposed to." "You're lying," someone shouted from the back. It was Linda. She had clearly had enough. "She's been using HOA funds for vacations," Linda yelled, standing up and pointing at Karen. "Trips that had nothing to do with any community activities, and the receipts for those spa days, those came from our dues, all of it. She's been embezzling from us for months. This is criminal." I couldn't help it. I smiled. It felt so good to see Karen squirm. She wasn't the powerful, untouchable HOA president anymore. She was just a woman caught in a web of her own lies, and everyone knew it. "I can explain," Karen said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to." "Explain," Bob called out from the other side of the room. "How are you going to explain this?" He stood up, holding up a printed copy of the bank statements I had sent out to everyone. "How do you explain these charges to the Bahamas, to that luxury hotel? And let's not forget the jet rentals. You've been living the high life while we've been paying for it." The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting, some were standing up, others were pointing at Karen, demanding answers. It was like watching the fall of a dictator, and it was glorious. Karen finally stood up, her hands shaking. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice growing louder as she tried to regain control. "I did what I had to do. I've worked hard for this community. I deserve some." "Deserve?" Someone else interrupted, a woman I didn't recognize. "You deserve to be in jail for what you've done, Karen. You've been stealing from all of us. You're not some victim here." "Enough," Karen shouted, slamming her hands down on the table. But no one was listening to her anymore. The room was filled with a cacophony of angry voices, all pointing at her, all demanding answers. I stood up from my seat, my heart racing. It was time. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, and now I had to make sure Karen couldn't talk her way out of it. I stepped toward the front of the room, my eyes fixed on Karen, who was still trying to gather her composure. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I approached the table. "Karen," I said, my voice cool and steady, "I have one question for you. You were so sure that this beach was yours to take over, that this community was yours to control. But did you really think you could get away with stealing from all of us?" She turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. "You've been behind this, haven't you?" she spat. "You're the one who's been spreading these lies, sending out my personal information." I cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Lies? You really think this is about lies, Karen? You've been lying to us for months. This isn't just about the money, though. This is about you trying to control everyone, make us all live under your thumb. Well, the jig's up." I walked up to the front, dropping the bombshell I'd been saving for this very moment. "I think it's time you take a good, hard look at what you've done, Karen," I said. You've been taking advantage of this whole community and it's over. People have had enough. You can try to talk your way out of this, but the truth is out now. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but I knew she had no ground left to stand on. The room had turned against her, and there was nothing she could do to change it. Her reign was over. I turned to the rest of the room. This isn't just about kicking her out of office, I said, my voice firm. This is about making sure she's held accountable. This isn't something we can let slide. She has to answer for what she's done. The room was silent for a moment, and then one by one people started speaking up. She needs to go, someone said. She's got to be removed from office. Another voice called out, I'm calling the police. She needs to face the consequences of her actions. The momentum was shifting, and Karen knew it. Her face was pale now, her shoulders slumped. She realized she had lost. The walls she'd built around herself had crumbled, and she was exposed for everyone to see. As the meeting drew to a close, people were already discussing what they needed to do next, how they would handle Karen, how they would make sure the HOA was taken back under control. And I just stood there, letting it all sink in. The best part, I didn't have to do anything else. The truth had already done its job. Karen's world had crumbled, and I had made sure she knew it was her own doing. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who could bring someone down like this. Sure, I'd watched movies where the underdog takes down the villain, but I always figured those stories were just fantasies. I wasn't some kind of superhero, right? But now, as I stood in the midst of the wreckage that Karen had created, I realized something. Sometimes real life is the best kind of justice. The aftermath of the HOA meeting was nothing short of a spectacle. Karen had been publicly shamed in front of everyone, and that alone was more than I could have hoped for. But what happened next? It was like watching a snowball roll down a mountain, gaining speed and size with every passing minute. I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction as I walked out of the community center that night. I had done it. We had done it. Karen was finally getting what she deserved. But the real work had just begun. The next few days were a whirlwind. The word spread like wildfire. Karen's little empire had come crashing down, and the community wasn't about to let her get away with it. Neighbors who had once been too timid to speak up were now coming out of the woodwork, eager to talk about everything Karen had done to screw them over. It was like everyone had been holding their breath, just waiting for someone to take the first step. And I had done that. That's when the phone call came. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the first real moment of peace I'd had in days when my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Bob. "Hey, Bob," I said, picking up the phone. "What's up?" "Alex, you need to sit down," he said, his voice serious. "I just got off the phone with the police. They're coming over to talk to you." I felt a rush of panic shoot through me. "The police? What do you mean? Is something wrong?" "Not with you, but with Karen," Bob said, lowering his voice. "She's been arrested. They've charged her with embezzlement, and now they're investigating the whole HOA. They want to know how deep this thing goes." My heart skipped a beat. I had always suspected that Karen's actions would catch up with her, but hearing the words out loud, hearing that she had been arrested, felt like a punch to the gut. "Arrested Karen? How the hell did that happen so fast?" "Someone must have tipped them off," Bob said. "I know it wasn't you, but they've got the receipts. All the stuff you found, those vacations, the spa trips, plus the bank records, it's all in there. She's done." I sat there in stunned silence. The thought of Karen, the woman who had terrorized this neighborhood for years, sitting in a jail cell was almost too satisfying to process. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. I didn't want anyone to go to jail. I didn't want revenge, not really. I just wanted justice. But Karen wasn't just anyone. She was a corrupt HOA president who had used her position to exploit the very people who trusted her. And now, she was facing the consequences of her actions. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I stood up quickly, walking to the door and opening it to find two officers standing on the other side. "Mr. Alex," one of them asked. "That's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on?" "We're here to talk to you about the ongoing investigation into Karen White," the officer said. "She's been arrested, and we're looking into her involvement with the HOA finances. We have reason to believe you may have some key information that could help our case." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. "I know about the embezzlement. I have the documents, the proof she's been using HOA funds for personal stuff. What do you need from me?" The officer gave me a tight-lipped smile. "We'll need you to come down to the station and give a statement. You don't have to worry about anything. We just need your testimony. We've already spoken to some of the other residents, and your information is crucial." "Sure," I said, swallowing hard. "I'll do whatever it takes." An hour later, I was sitting in a sterile interrogation room at the local police station, waiting for my turn to speak. I'd never been in a situation like this before. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't some kind of whistleblower either. I was just a guy who had decided to stand up for what was right when no one else would. When the detective finally entered the room, he wasted no time. He introduced himself, and then, without missing a beat, he dove right in. "So, Mr. Alex," the detective said, sitting across from me, "you've been the one to expose Karen White's theft of HOA funds. Can you tell us how you got involved in this?" I leaned back in my chair, trying to stay calm. "I didn't get involved. Karen involved me when she decided to throw a party on my property without asking. I didn't want any of this, but when I realized what she was doing, I couldn't let it slide." The detective nodded, scribbling notes as I spoke. "And you discovered her financial misconduct?" "Yeah," I said. "I found out she was using HOA money for personal expenses, luxury vacations, hotel stays, things like that. I'm no financial expert, but when I saw those receipts, I knew something was wrong." The detective gave me a long, hard look. "And you didn't report it immediately?" I shrugged. "I tried, but Karen is. Well, she's got connections. People are afraid of her. I didn't want to just go to the cops without knowing I had solid proof." "You did the right thing," the detective said, offering me a reassuring smile. "We've already started freezing her accounts, and we'll be looking into the rest of the HOA's finances to see if anyone else is involved. This is just the beginning, but you did good, Alex. You gave us the lead we needed." I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long, the worry about how I would expose Karen without causing chaos, suddenly, it didn't feel so heavy anymore. I wasn't just sitting on the sidelines anymore. I had done something. I had made a difference. As I left the police station, I couldn't help but think about what had led me here. Karen had always thought she was untouchable, but I had proven that nobody is beyond the reach of justice. No matter how powerful you think you are, you can't escape the truth forever. Over the next few weeks, Karen's life became a whirlwind of legal proceedings, public shamming, and the bitter reality of the consequences of her actions. She was removed from the HOA board, banned from holding any future positions in the neighborhood, and of course, she was facing charges of embezzlement. I wasn't sure what would happen to her after that, but I knew one thing: she would never be in charge of our community again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't need to be some hero. I didn't need to wear a cape or shout about my victories from the rooftops. But I knew that I had made a difference. I had taken back my beach, my neighborhood, and my peace of mind. Karen might have thought she was the queen of the world, but in the end, justice was the real ruler. And no one, not even Karen, could escape its grasp. It had been a few weeks since the dust had settled on Karen's reign of terror, and I had to admit, things were finally looking up. The neighborhood was calmer, quieter, and for the first time in years, it felt like the community was starting to come back together. The toxic cloud that Karen had cast over everything was gone, and people were starting to breathe again. I wasn't a hero, at least not in the traditional sense. I didn't want to be seen as some sort of vigilante who swoops in and saves the day. But I knew this: when people like Karen take advantage of their power, it's up to the rest of us to step up. That's exactly what I did, and honestly, it felt good. I spent my days in relative peace now. The beach was mine again, and it had become the sanctuary it was meant to be. No more loud parties, no more mariachi bands, no more HOA-related nonsense. I could sit on my porch, sip my iced tea, and watch the waves without being bombarded by chaos. It felt like a dream, except this time I wasn't waking up to the nightmare anymore. But as with any great victory, there's always the bittersweet aftertaste. Karen may have lost her position, but the wheels of justice were still turning. The arrest, the charges, the investigation, it wasn't just going to disappear. I didn't know what would happen to her, but I couldn't help but feel a little guilty, even if she deserved it. That guilt, however, didn't last long. One evening, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon when I heard a car pull up. I didn't recognize the vehicle, but I didn't think much of it at first. Then, a knock came at the door. I stood up and walked over to answer it, half expecting it to be another neighbor or maybe a delivery. But when I opened the door, there stood someone I hadn't seen in a while, Karen. Her face was different now. Gone was the confident, somewhat arrogant woman who had once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. Now she looked tired, defeated, but there was something else in her eyes, something I hadn't expected. "Alex," she said, her voice shaky, "I need to talk to you." I stood there for a moment, completely caught off guard. After everything that had happened, after how she had treated me and everyone else in the neighborhood, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, tell her to go to hell and never come back. But another part of me, maybe the part of me that believed in second chances, or at least the idea of them, felt a flicker of curiosity. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. She looked down, taking a deep breath before speaking again. I know what you did. I know you were the one who exposed me, and I deserve everything that's happening to me right now, but I wanted to apologize." I blinked, taken aback. This wasn't what I expected, not in the least. "Apologize?" I repeated, still trying to process what she was saying. "You want to apologize after everything, after you used all of us, treated us like your personal playground?" "I do," she said, her voice breaking. "And I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I'm not here to try to fix what I did. I know I can't, but I've lost everything. My reputation, my friends, my future. I need you to understand that I know I messed up." I took a step back, crossing my arms. "So, what, you think just because you're standing here now, that makes everything okay? You think an apology will fix the chaos you caused?" Karen shook her head, her shoulders slumping. "No, I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say it. To you, you were the one who had the guts to stand up to me. You were the one who saw through my lies, and I respect that. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Alex. I'm here because I need to own up to what I did." Her words hung in the air between us. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to tell her that her apology didn't mean anything, that she couldn't just waltz in here after everything she'd done and expect me to believe she was sorry. But another part of me understood the gravity of what she was saying. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't trying to justify her actions. She was owning them, and that was something I hadn't expected. "Look," I said after a long pause, "I'm not going to pretend that what you did doesn't hurt. It's going to take a lot more than just words to make up for what you put this community through. But I'll say this, you finally took responsibility for it. That's more than I thought you would do." She nodded, a faint trace of gratitude in her eyes. "I don't deserve a second chance, Alex, but I'm hoping that at least one person will be able to see that I'm not the person I was. I've got a long way to go, and I'll be facing the consequences of my actions for a long time. But I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." There was a long silence. I could feel the weight of the moment hanging between us, and for the first time since Karen had stormed into my life, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I felt something else. A little relief, maybe, a little clarity. "I'm not sure what's going to happen to you, Karen," I said finally. "And I'm not going to pretend I'm your friend, but you're right about one thing: you've lost a lot, and now it's time to rebuild. You're going to have to do that on your own. I can't help you with that." "I know," she said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to start with being honest, for once." I nodded, turning my gaze back toward the ocean. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, grounding. There was a sense of finality to the conversation, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could close the door on it. Karen had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. "Good luck," I said, the words feeling a little strange coming from my mouth, but not completely out of place. "I hope you find a way to make things right, for yourself." And with that, I stepped back and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't feel the need to be dramatic, but I also knew that part of me had closed the chapter on Karen. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about accepting that sometimes people make mistakes, huge mistakes, and the best you can do is move on and let them figure out their own path. As I sat back down on my porch, looking out at the now quiet beach, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had tried to control everything. She had tried to make this community fit into her mold, and when things didn't go her way, she tried to crush anyone who stood in her path. But in the end, it wasn't her power that mattered. It was the truth. The truth always finds a way to come out, even if it takes a while. I had taken a stand when no one else would. I had fought for what was right, not because I wanted revenge, but because it was the only thing left to do. I had fought for my peace. And that, in the end, was all that really mattered. The waves crashed against the shore, the evening breeze ruffled my hair, and I knew that the worst was behind me. No one could take my beach again.